Cette conférence va maintenant être enregistrée.
Oh, so our recorder is speaking French today. I guess that means our colleagues at Benin were using it less. So thank you all for joining today. We have a very good attendance today. I'm looking very much forward to this presentation that we're going to have shortly. You all should be seeing my screen. And if you are live tweeting this, we are using the glorious hashtag of Shift the Power. Recently, we've enlisted a whole group of our former movement interns to also tweet along with us when we use that hashtag. So our agenda for today is, I want to welcome you all first. I'm John Coonrod. I'm the co-founder and coordinator of the Movement for Community-Led Development. And I especially want to welcome the representatives today from our new members. We have 3 new global members: Accountability Council, Islamic Relief, and Outreach International. So, and you'll be hearing a lot from Accountability Council next month in June, as I'll be making a special presentation. But before then, I will be sharing out an article that Samer from that team wrote that really speaks to the importance of what we're committed to. I'll give us a brief overview for those of you who are new or just enjoy brief overviews of what we're about in the Movement for Community-Led Development. And then I'll introduce our guest speaker from Unicef, Rania, who is going to present, as you saw in the announcements, the new minimum standards for community engagement that Unicef has recently adopted. We'll have an update on our work together on adaptation of the processes of community empowerment and mobilization during the time of COVID-19. We'll hear updates from our chapters around the world. And oops, this slide is obsolete. The next meeting is going to be June 24th. So to give you a brief introduction, many of us in civil society and implementers of programs in villages around the world have been very frustrated for decades because we could find small pots of money to fund work on nutrition, or a short-term project on nutrition, or a short-term project on health, or a short-term project on literacy or WASH, but that big blue circle of developing the capacity of local communities to make all of these things happen, there didn't seem to be any funding windows for that. The process didn't even have a name. All of us who believed in it had different names for it. Because there was no money, there was no shared body of evidence, no shared best practices, there was no way to work together on this very important big blue circle. And then in 2012, some papers started coming out describing that process from some think tanks, and they called it community-led development. And as I discussed this with a number of civil society groups, and we read these papers, we agreed that, wow, these people really are on the same page we're on. Let's all call it community-led development. And with the Sustainable Development Goals launch in September of 2015, we launched the Movement for Community-Led Development to try to raise the profile of this very important process, to encourage governments and donors and ministries to support it. And we set 5 goals. The first is voice and agency for women, youth, and marginalized groups, people whose fundamental human right to have voice in the decisions that affect their lives have been most suppressed. The second goal is to really transform public financing so that local communities have a fair share of public financing which we're pushing a norm of at least 20% of the public resources should be in the hands of local communities. In rich countries, that's probably 50%, but in the most low-income countries, it's maybe only 2 or 3% of public resources make it to the grassroots level. We want good local governance, and by that we mean that local councils are elected, not appointed, that they have transparency, that they have public accountability, social accountability, that there's opportunity for citizens to directly participate with a local government. That should result in quality public services for all. And it also provides the opportunity for real resilience. Resilience, we've all learned, and we're seeing particularly now in the time of COVID-19, is a community attribute. There's really no such thing as a resilient country or a resilient household. There are resilient communities, and a country full of resilient communities is going to be a resilient country. We have a super simple theory of change. We want community-led development for every community. That means community mobilizers, facilitators, people who can break the mindset of dependency and clientelism with communities. We need hundreds of thousands of those working in concert. And that's going to require the blessings of our governments and their aid partners, and that's going to require advocacy. So a lot of what our movement does are these two big arrows, getting all the people together in a country who really believe in the power of communities to take charge of their own development and have developed the skills to facilitate that process, and a team of advocates to engage their local government and really show them that this is the right way to go. So we do this in many countries, and we have some regional coordinators. Some of you will hear from them today. In East Africa, Daisy Owamogoshu. In Southern Africa, Roland Kaucha. In West Africa, Pascal Johosu. We have a number of individual chapters, a very strong one you'll hear from in Mexico. And then we're starting to get real participation from folks in Venezuela. And we work with a sister network called Login, Local Governance Initiative and Network, that covers the same agenda in the South and Southeast Asia. So with that introduction, I want to introduce our special guest speaker, Rania Elasawi from Unicef. Many of you have heard me speak for months on the coming new minimum quality standards and indicators for community engagement. I was really honored to be invited to serve on the working group for this. And now I'm very, very excited that it's happening because UNICEF plays such a critical role in the world, and having them mainstream these kinds of principles is a really good thing. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and let Rania share her screen and introduce this subject. Over to you, Rania. So far, I'm not seeing you or your screen.
John, I think her connection got interrupted. I just saw her leave.
Oh my gosh, thank you for letting me know. Let's see. It's every organizer's nightmare. Okay, well, we'll hope she gets back on. Meanwhile, I will share my screen again and we'll go on to the next item on the agenda. Let's see, go to meeting screen. Chrome tab. And then Gunjan, just barge in when you see that Rania has come back. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yeah, and she's back.
Oh, and she's back. Okay, well then. Rania, can you turn on your camera and mic, and then I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, John. Sorry, I had a technical glitch, so I actually had to log off and come back on. So, but anyway, so yes, I'm really pleased to be here with everybody today. I'm just going to load my presentation and then jump right into it. Okay. Could you let me know, John, if it's visible?
Yes, I'm seeing your whole screen.
Perfect.
And now I'm seeing your slides. Great.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. And honestly, it's a real pleasure to be here with everybody today. And I'm looking forward to really building on what you've already presented. And it's really great to hear from you about what the Hunger Project has been doing and the evolution of it. So I'm going to jump right into it. Just to mention a little bit about me, I'm Rania. I work with UNICEF. I am with currently with the global team based in headquarters in New York. I've been working in country offices in the Middle East, in Africa, and South Asia for probably the better part of 15 years. And so having recently joined New York, it's really great to be from a different perspective with an organization that is very much grassroots oriented among UN agencies. We very much work at the community level with a presence in more than 150 countries. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of you are quite aware of the work that UNICEF actually does. So I'm going to jump into what I'm here to talk about today, the community engagement minimum standards and indicators. And just to mention that John has been engaged in this, and it's been really great to actually be able to tap into so many different practitioners and different partners that have contributed to the development of these minimum standards. And so just a little bit about what were they inspired from. And I think, as John rightly talked about, what the SDGs and the opportunity for the opportunity the SDGs actually posed in repositioning the discussion around people-centered approaches, and realizing that the 2030 agenda for sustainable development could not leave out the with the people. And I like to say that, quote unquote, with the people. Without development being oriented around what people wanted, people influencing their own agenda, their own capacities. There is no transformative agenda at all. Policy cannot be set without being informed by people's voices. But beyond that, it is about the meaningful engagement and the sustained engagement. These are relationships that are built over time. And so having said that, I think one of the tipping points also was the 2014-2015 West African Ebola crisis, which I was actually in Liberia during that time. And I think one of the things that the world actually reflected on back then, and fast forward to now during COVID, it was all about the people. It was all about behavior change. It was all about the resilience of the communities and who was involved to be able to get past that crisis. And I think that it's the same today. So having said that, so the community engagement minimum standards and indicators were a process that started a few years after that crisis. And the conversation really started during that time, because during that humanitarian response, traditionally the public health outbreak responses have always been approached from a very biomedical approach. How do we stop transmission, the epidemiological perspective, contact tracing, etc. But what really was brought to light was this was about behavior change. And behavior change is a very individual as well as community level type of change. So during that Ebola crisis, there was a lot more focus around social mobilization, community-led approaches, community surveillance, and what community actions were done. So when this discussion started among humanitarian partners as well as governments, the call was made for, okay, we've been talking about community-led approaches for decades, actually. And so can we actually agree to a common set of standards and indicators, and have an agreement on a common language among all stakeholders, and where we can agree on principles and goals and actions and benchmarks around community engagement for development practice in general, because that's when we start to think about preparedness action before a humanitarian crisis occurs again. So based on that, the discussion among partners, mainly implementing partners like the UN, like IFRC, like other NGOs, as well as engaging with country partners that Unicef engaged with, we started to have a discussion around how can we think about establishing a global framework around community engagement. So yeah. So one of the key things that we were all in agreement was, can we establish global principles and a framework for these standards? And that was the process of who do we engage and how do we get the conversation going? And the focus was really on, if we're going to have specific principles and framework, how can we align it with what is already existing, and build on the ethical foundations that are already ingrained in so many different human rights treaties, as well as frameworks for humanitarian assistance, as well as international development. But the core principles should be centered around quality, accountability, harmonization, and the optimization of interventions. And what do we mean by that? So when we're thinking about community engagement with quality, that means that it's not just about the process of community engagement. It's not just about ensuring the participation, but it is looking at what are the outcomes of participation. It's not just about when we talk about accountability, it's about demonstrating the value for community engagement. What is the value at community level, but also at a government level when they are more accountable, and when they ensure that people are able to attain their rights, when they ensure that participatory planning processes are institutionalized, when they ensure that people's voice are taken into account when policy setting is happening. So how do we really strengthen accountability? And then around harmonization, so across organizations in different contexts, and realizing that, you know, in every country there is a different context. From community to community there are different contexts, but how can we at least have common understanding around what we want to achieve through community engagement? And then optimization of interventions. More isn't always better. It's not always about, okay, we need to do so many different types of activities, so many different partners doing the same thing. How can we actually strategically plan and be intentional about these processes and align our what we do? And all of these will contribute to developing an enabling environment for quality as well as evidence-based community engagement. So as I mentioned, the ethical foundations were really in alignment with what's already existing. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, as we like to say so much in development, but it's really ingrained in, you know, human rights, the community-based approach, ensuring the do no harm principles that are really ingrained in humanitarian assistance, but in general also in development, and ensuring that we looked at all of these different existing frameworks that are already there to build on that for the community engagement minimum standards and ensure that they're aligned. So the process was over 18 months, basically. We engaged in initially a desk review of documents after documents, actually. And at that time, I was actually working in another country office at that time. So this process started late 2017. It continued on through 2018, and mid last year was when we finally finalized the final version. But there were many draft versions that were circulated, and as we went through this process, there were also numerous regional as well as country consultations. So stemming from first the literature review and the documents from multiple partners that were shared, there were print documents that were practitioner documents or guides or manuals and toolkits to look at what could we generate a commonality around. So then from that, we went to consultations with stakeholders, and there were sector-specific working groups that were aligned with how UNICEF actually structures their program. So a very sector focus, but deep diving into how community engagement was being addressed within the sectors. And as John rightly mentioned, I think one of the things that is what we often find, and the evidence reinforces over and over, is that when we begin to talk about empowerment or community engagement, the financing within sectors for those types of interventions are often very limited. So these types of consultations with different stakeholders globally at country level, we had a few country consultations, we had a couple of regional consultations as well, where we were even able to engage with government representatives, sometimes government representation from ministries of local governance, ministries of community development, because also in different contexts they have different types of ministries that represent them for community engagement. So through all of these different consultations and over this span of a year and a half, we were able to come up with a common framework and understanding actually that what do we want to be looking at and ensuring in a community engagement minimum standards framework. So I think somebody is not on mute because I hear some background noise. So anyway, I will try to continue speaking. So when we decided on how to structure the minimum standards framework, what we wanted to make sure we were able to. Hello? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you.
We were just facing the
sure.
background noise.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so getting into the minimum standards framework, so what we wanted to propose was that the standards and indicators would be a tool for development and humanitarian actors, and particularly actually governments as well as civil society partners that that support these processes at a community level, and that the standards needed to be practical for practice. Okay, so practical for practice, but how would we think about the integration of these community engagement standards within project cycles or program development, methodologies, research methodologies, participatory approaches, and coordination mechanisms and platforms for community engagement? How would we also make the community engagement minimum standards speak to how resources were mobilized and leveraged, as well as operationalized? So I think that is one of the key unique factors, because for the first time when we're talking about community engagement minimum standards, it's not just about, we want to make sure that the principles are applied, like participation and inclusion, etc. But we need to actually speak to, what do we mean by human resources that are required? What does that mean formally and informally? How inclusive are we in terms of representation? And are we engaging the right networks when we want to be inclusive? So that operational part is really critical. So beyond what we state in, and let me go just present them, in part A, which are the core standards for us, that we want to ensure that participation, empowerment, inclusion, two-way communication, localization, and local capacity are critical to any community engagement intervention. But as important are part B and C and D, which talk about our implementation modalities, the coordination and the accountability that I spoke about. Who is the leadership at the government level? Who are the other implementing partners at the community level? And then in terms of resources, this is human resources. This is about the budgeting processes. And I found it very interesting that, John, you actually mentioned the 20% for public financing, because that is absolutely critical. And being able to not just identify targets for resources and financial resources, but also be able to track that over time, because that's how we would measure our results for the implementation of the community engagement, of these community engagement minimum standards. So the way that the document is actually structured, and I think that John has already circulated the link for it, for each of these standards, we've provided a common definition that has been, of course, as I mentioned, through all of the processes of the discussion and the literature review and all of this, these have become a common definition. And for each of these standards, there are defined actions. And then after the actions, there are proposed indicators for how would we monitor progress for each of these standards, for all 16 of them. And I know, oftentimes the non-community engagement, I'm pretty sure that this is not the issue here, but everyone says, oh my God, 16 indicators, 16 standards or 16 indicators, that's too much, that's never going to happen. And the intent also is not to say that every single standard and indicator will be taken up immediately, but we're saying at the bare minimum, if we are to be intentional and be structured and really look at the impacts of community engagement, these are actually the standards that need to be applied. So just to give a really quick idea, because I will be sharing the presentation, so I don't want to go too much into detail, but I think just to say, very clearly, what we don't measure and track is very difficult for us to, number one, generate the evidence on its importance, but number two, be able to show what its impact is, as well as the value out of it. The critical is, hello?
Go ahead, Rania. It's just somebody's
So
unmuted.
it was super critical for us to ensure that we not only propose standards, but we also provide possible suggested indicators so that we can illustrate what is it that we actually want to be able to track and measure as a bare minimum. So when you see the actual document, you won't find 2,000 indicators because that was also very impractical, although we did review more than 2,000 plus indicators. When we wanted to propose these indicators, they were suggestive indicators to show what were the high level outcomes that we were proposing that we would want to be tracking, so that if there was a possibility for these indicators to be integrated at a systems level and tracked by government, by civil society partners, these were the core indicators that would enable us to generate that evidence, to also track progress, and to be able eventually to show the results, and to enable us to also build an evidence base and be able to also influence decision-making processes, course corrections during program implementation or interventions. So the way that the indicators were structured were, we've proposed indicators that would be taken up at national or local government level, and then indicators for civil society partners, and as well as indicators for community level that could be developed by the community as well, for them to be able to track their own progress and their own activities. So these are just an example of a few of them, and I'll just maybe pick up on a couple of them. For example, like when we're talking about empowerment and ownerships, for this, we there's one indicator that we propose that look at the reporting mechanisms for identifying if work with existing community groups and institutions is locally supported, including for receiving complaints. So that's a part of the actual application of social accountability mechanisms. So being able to have indicators like this that would be actually taken up and reported and would be tracked would enable us to be able to figure out whether actual actions were actually happening, whether mechanisms were actually put into place. Because if these mechanisms are put in place, they need to be planned, they need to be budgeted, and the progress out of what they actually do would show their viability, whether they are actually functional or not, and whether they are inclusive or not, and whether they are empowered to take decisions or not. And when we include these parts around receiving complaints, because the intention would be that they would also action that. So this is just one example, and I don't want to go through all of them because they are quite extensive, and we can have conversations around each and every one of them. But this is just to show that this is the level of what we intend to monitor and track, and this is how that increases the accountability also of those that are responsible. So from a national and local government level, being the duty bearers, in ensuring that community engagement processes are actually integrated within institutions, within processes that the government actually is accountable for. As samples, and these are just a few samples from the NGO or civil society one, and of course that is very loose, right, and broad, because it can be taken up by private sector. It could be academia when they are doing research as well. It could be a UN agency, and it could be a local NGO that are responsible for this. So I'm going to zip through because I do want to give some time for some discussion. And then there is another proposed tool that we've integrated in these community engagement minimum standards is we've developed a tool that is more of an open structure, basically, for developing indicators. And so what we are intending to do is to say, if a community wants to develop their own interventions, they should be able to localize their own indicators and be able to track and report on things. So around issues, for example, on like inclusion, how would they identify the most marginalized groups and ensure that in their participatory planning processes that they are reaching out and ensuring that they are reaching out and they are participating in different meetings or platforms and actions and influencing prioritization of issues at a very grassroots level. So this would also be used at a community level to increase the accountability within a community, because communities are the ones that are always there, and they're the ones that are resilient, as John also mentioned, and we must support them and their processes that are already existing and will continue to exist when we are there or not there. So this is just to also say that, at the most local level, also being able to track what they do at a community level, this further empowers them and increases their accountability within the community level as well. So where are we now? So as I mentioned, 18 months later, the community engagement minimum standards were launched officially, but they were often being used in so many different spaces as they were developing, actually. And it was very interesting because the appetite for them was, yes, of course, everybody knows community engagement is super important, but this is really great to actually have something that is a common framework for all of us. So unofficially, I think that everybody was actually using them and referencing them throughout the entire process, throughout the entire process of developing the standards. But officially, after August 2019, I think that there was another shift where many organizations, depending on where they are in their own programming and planning processes, we're really interested in looking at the community engagement standards from an institutionalization perspective, and how they would be able to begin to integrate the quality criteria. So as UNICEF, from our perspective, what we have been focusing on is our own internal development as well as humanitarian assistance programming. So, for example, our core commitments for children that define how UNICEF engages in humanitarian action were under review as an organization within the organization. And now what we have done is we have integrated the community engagement minimum standards as a core commitment for all programs, whether it's health or WASH. But what we've done is we've taken it to a different level and on how do we articulate what a program intervention during a humanitarian context or response would look like for each of them. So this is a core organizational policy where we mobilize resources around that, we do planning around that, we do implementation around that, we've established monitoring indicators, core indicators for that, for the implementation of community engagement during humanitarian response across the organization. So this rollout process, of course, is a very extensive one. It requires capacity building. It requires working with so many different partners at global, at regional, at country levels. So this is one of the priorities right now within the organization, and as well in development processes. I think one of the things that UNICEF also does is we also review our strategic. We have a strategic plan that defines our engagement in all countries every 4 to 5 years, and that influences how we also engage in WASH, in health, in child protection. And what we've been looking at is how community engagement it should be more intentional and structured and integrated within these programs. So that's part of our own dissemination process within the organization. But in addition to that, how we work with different partners, global partners such as WHO, which are other UN agencies, but also the IFRC and different interagency processes. But in addition to that, also donors, multilateral institutions such as USAID, Gates Foundation, and different partners on what are their roles also in the uptake and what would that look like, what type of actions and implementation can happen. And through these processes of disseminating the standards and working with these different platforms, we're actually developing actions or implementation actions with these different types of partners for the uptake of these standards. So, for example, even in academia and within research platforms, we're in process of discussing with the NIHR, which provides global health funds to many countries to do research. So, how can research also be influenced by these community engagement minimum standards and ensure that communities are involved even in like owning their own data when research is being conducted, and what is the accountability out of research to communities when there is research that is conducted at a community level. So these are multiple opportunities for us, and we have developed a formal roadmap for these different types of partners, as well as advocacy messages for what could be the actions that could be taken by the different partners to integrate the community engagement minimum standards. So this is my final slide, and I'll stop here. And because I think that it's such a great opportunity to have everybody on the line today from THP and really talk about or be able to address any of your questions around what would be the opportunities for this network to take up the community engagement minimum standards in the work that you actually do, whether it is from a value add perspective or more from an operational perspective. I think everybody has a role to play, from advocacy down to implementation level. And then the other opportunity is for those organizations that actually have country presence. As I mentioned, UNICEF works in more than 150 countries globally, where the opportunities for collaboration in countries and particularly the coordination platforms and the programming support that UNICEF provides, we often work through development partner forums, and it would be really great for us to engage your organization and ensure that we can coordinate and work together better. And that's it from me. And over to you.
Wonderful, Rania.
Thank you.
Congratulations for getting it this far, and thank you everybody who's joined. We're up to about 80 people on the line, so if anyone has a question of Rania, if you could maybe type it into the chat, that would probably be the most efficient way. Are there anyone have questions for Rania? This presentation, the recording, and her slides and the documents will be available on the Movement for Community-Led Development website. We've got one congratulations to you and a thanks, Rania.
Hello.
Hello, who's speaking? Is this Dr. Saidu? Hello,
Hello?
who's speaking? Yes, do you have a question for Rania?
Yeah. How are you doing? We are not clear of the network, and we hardly make our contribution.
Aha.
Hello,
Okay,
you hear me?
Yes, yes, Dr. Maza, I do hear you. Do you have a question for Rania?
Yes.
Can you
no,
please ask?
Because the network is not too much clear to us. It's fluctuating. That's why we cannot contribute much.
Yes, we understand.
And yeah, and our request, if there's way of another sending us the deliberation, then we'll appreciate it, because now the network
we can do that.
We
can do that. We will send you the recording and the information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, listen, Rania, thank you again. I think we're going to move forward with the rest of the agenda of the meeting. And you're getting applause from Dr. Rebecca there. So thank you again, Rania. And if I will turn my slides back on and move, let's see, how do I do that? Okay, I will say screen.
So John, there are a couple of quick questions. Should I try to respond to just a couple of them? That's why I turned my screen off, so that I can actually
Yes, they must have sent them to you directly, because I wasn't seeing them on the chat. So please go ahead and answer the questions.
Sure. So, I mean, I think there is Dinah Brown. She's asking a question about how are we disseminating to communities and supporting them to hold UNICEF and others to account for implementing them. I mean, so just to say that, we realize that this is a very long-term process, Dinah, and at the end of the day, just being able to establish the community engagement minimum standards, the principles, the framework, the indicators, it's a long process. And I would like to say that, there are several approaches from a UNICEF side. One is, I work at global level. There are people that work at regional level, and there are those that work at country office level. For the functional area that I work within on social behavior change, what we are trying to do is ensure that in new programs that there is an accountability within the organization, that we actually incorporate the principles of community engagement, and that when we are developing project proposals as well as other types of activities, that we are trying to strengthen our implementation and hold ourselves accountable for reporting. So we've actually integrated indicators within our programming processes that look at how we consider community engagement, tracking participation, tracking inclusion, being able to look at tracking reach, tracking engagement, and tracking feedback that come from communities. This is by no means, I mean, again, this is establishing indicators, but it is one way for us to formalize and strengthen some of the processes that we already have ongoing. And so this will continue evolving for us, and hopefully one day the issue will be that these become integrated within national and subnational platforms. And that's what the goal of the work that UNICEF mainly does, for this to be an accountability at a local governance level. I mean, that's one of the positive things for UNICEF is we also work within the social policy and local governance sphere. So we do a lot of work with local governance now to integrate participatory planning and budgeting indicators and frameworks so that we can try to track this over time. It's a very long process. That's what I just want to, continue
We'll try to help you speed it up, Rania.
Yes, and so by all means, I would like to say that if you are working at country levels, it would be really great for you to tap into the UNICEF colleagues that are working there to support them on things like this, because we are trying to engage much more strategically to ensure that these things are integrated within local systems, within administrative systems, and that projects are informed by communities.
And is there a point of contact person in those countries for this? If I send you a list of countries, could you send us points of contact?
Absolutely.
Yay, okay.
If there's
specific, you saw
specific...
David Cupp's question also asking about grassroots engagement in establishing these standards.
Yeah, and I mean, so I mean, in my previous position, I was working in India country office. Absolutely. I think one of the things, though, that is a challenge sometimes is working with local organizations one-on-one. So oftentimes the way UNICEF does approach it is we aim to work with larger networks, because it helps us also with how do we engage better in capacity building that is a bit more structured. So we engaged, for example, in India with Core Group that had more than 100 NGOs mapped out across the country. And a lot of them were very local and grassroots oriented. So building the capacity of national platforms that would then work within the communities is one of the things that we often do. So definitely UNICEF country offices usually have a point person there. We can link people up so that it would be much more practical for them to have discussions at a country level, because then they would be able to understand the way we have certain partnerships and be able to guide us in certain times where, maybe we are not working with the right partners. Maybe there are other partners that need to be at the table. So, and I think that is one of the things that UNICEF does play a good role in also ensuring that we have diverse civil society partners. So just to mention that.
Very good. So I'm going to take the screen back and we're going to continue on with our program. But thank you again, Rania. It was a great presentation. We're looking forward to engaging with UNICEF everywhere, always on this.
Great, and it was my pleasure to be here. I'll stay on a little bit for the COVID-19 one to listen in a little bit, and if there's anything that I can offer, I'll follow up with you too, John.
Great, wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. So as you know, we have this whole amazing process going on. We've now had 2 big calls, even bigger than the global call, on adapting community-led development strategies and programs to the COVID-19 situation. The one was on April 21st. The last one was just last week. These were organized by Nellie and Gunjan. And Nellie, do you want to give us a brief update on the latest process that took place?
Sure thing. So yeah, as you mentioned, we had our second call. Maybe some or many of you were on that. We were looking at continuing to look at adapting CLD processes in light of COVID restrictions and impacts. So that's both the legal restrictions around shutdowns and social distance or physical distancing, but also the emotional and psychological impacts. So the first call that was in April focused more on what could be adapted now, brainstorming big ideas around the restrictions that we were facing across 4 different kinds of barriers that led us to not be able, or continue to leave us to not be able to hold large meetings, or for staff and facilitators and animators to travel to communities. But the second call that was held last Wednesday began to look forward a little bit more. So how should programming evolve to be better prepared for crises like this, whether it's another wave of COVID or a different kind of crisis that has similar barriers, one or multiple. In a lot of places, restrictions are starting to ease, but they may return if a wave of infection happens again. So what can we do in the next 6 to 10 weeks if restrictions are easing, or if they're not, but also then long term? That call built also on a reflections paper that was put together following the first call in April. We circulated a draft of that for feedback, and we'll be sharing the final version of that soon. That paper looked at some of the emerging themes that are coming out, including having a community of practitioners on this topic, both to have support for everything that everyone's facing personally and in their work, and also to share ideas, to learn from past experiences. 79% of respondents in the first call said that they faced similar kinds of barriers from other crises, whether that's Ebola or flooding, tsunamis, typhoons, violence, terrorism. We were reminded to follow communities' lead, even in times of this, the limits of technology, that sometimes that's not the right answer, and also that government policies alone are not the only right answer. We have to come up with different solutions for different people. And finally, that we were really caught off guard. We weren't prepared as a community to adapt to this immediately. So we had 2 questions from that paper that we started to explore on the call, and we hope to continue, which is, to be better prepared next time. One, should crisis preparedness be more integrated into our regular programming, and what might that look like? And also, what functions and roles could be transferred to communities so that they don't have to halt in the same way? So essentially, how could this experience actually spur us to be even more community-led in programming? We will be sharing that reflections paper, the final version of it. As mentioned, there's a summary of Wednesday's call on the MCLD website, and we'll also be putting together a draft of a second reflections paper, building a series. There'll be another call in June. There was a lot of support to keep having these monthly meetings. So we will pursue that. There was also interest from a number of different corners in having a working group to do some more dedicated ongoing work. So we're going to explore that, and we'll be eliciting feedback from people and updating everyone as we go. And then the last thing I just wanted to remind everyone in terms of the COVID initiatives is on the website. I think Gunjan's going to put a link in. There's a innovations database where we're collecting or collating the different kinds of activities that communities and CLD organizations are doing to address COVID. So that's not the regular programming. Those are things like setting up tippy tap or hand washing stations, making masks, distributing aid and food, all kinds of things like that. We'd love to be able to showcase these and collect them all in one place. One is a way to share ideas, and also as a tool for all of us to demonstrate why it's so important to have community-led development processes in place so that they can mobilize and respond really quickly. I think that's everything. Gunjan, is there anything else we should raise at this point? We'll send around dates for the next call as well as all of the different documents, and as always, would very much encourage and love everybody's continued active input and participation in these conversations.
Thanks, Nelly. I think you covered everything, and I have put in the chat box links to the page where the meeting documents are, the reflections paper, and also the innovations database. Thank you.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nelly and Gunjan, and everybody who joined in those conversations. It was just quite inspiring to hear both the challenges and how people are overcoming them. Okay, we're now going to take a quick tour around the world. I'd like to start in East Africa. Oh, I see. Justice to show me leaves, how terrible. But let me ask Daisy, Dr. Daisy, if you can unmute and give us any update from East Africa.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see a lot of people today. Yeah, I'm here in Kampala, Uganda. Yesterday, we had at least a partial lockdown where they allowed some private cars to be moving about. So hopefully we'll be out of this lockdown sooner than later. So some of the highlights I have for Uganda is that as a chapter, we had actually one of the major meetings since the lockdown about 2 weeks ago on the 15th. And most of the members were really happy to connect again and to be able to learn from each other what we are doing. We had been communicating through the group, but we realized this coming together was also a space to share more deeply on what we are doing and also to learn from each other. So we had that as a major activity for the Uganda chapter. And some of the issues which came out was that we can still learn from each other. We realized we are doing some things, some are being done one way, some are succeeding, some are reaching more people, and also looking at some of the challenges which some of the members were facing. So that was very, very good. At the end of the meeting, we came up with a statement which was more like a call to action again to the government, to other civil society members, and to ourselves on what actually needs to be done, how far we have come, and where we are headed. It was published in one of the major newspapers, and also is being shared on Facebook and other social media. So we are getting a lot of response from some of the members of the readership on what can actually be done to address the COVID pandemic. In the same statement, in the same meeting, we also realized that the government COVID response plan was sort of top down and was not incorporating some of the concerns of the communities and maybe also the civil society. So we also agreed and are inputting into the government COVID response plan. I also realized it stops at how do we stop the spread, but it's not going on to empower communities after. So we are looking at how we can include the after. How do we come in as civil society? How do communities also participate in an issue that actually affects them? So we thought that was really very key, and we also had a participation from the National NGO Forum, which is sort of an umbrella organization for all NGOs in Uganda. They were also participating, and they are the focal point person with the focal point organization with what was that our statement, we will also take it to the office of the Prime Minister. So that now we have that sort of having the NGO forum behind us to be able to through the office of the Prime Minister. So that was what we've been doing. But because we have also realized that this COVID the pandemic has also showed that there is a need for actual partnership. Nobody can go it alone. And it has also shown the need for actually the regional aspect because in Uganda, they had put a lockdown. Kenya had put a partial lockdown. Tanzania didn't lock down. So we are getting people coming in and out, and most of the cases we are having in Uganda are coming from outside the country. So how do you address such challenges? So the need also to work at a regional level came in strongly, and that is something we are also looking at, thinking of on how we can utilize that space. So there is a need for a coordinated response. Maybe like the way we had realized actually community-led development, you can't work on it alone. The COVID pandemic has shown it clearly that there is a need for a coordinated response. You can't go and mobilize here, maybe take a message, somebody comes with their own message, another one comes with another message or something else. It all becomes sort of mixed up. So that one came out clearly. And also the need to adapt again for the chapter to adapt to these emerging needs. And one of the key emerging need was the ICT, the use of the phones, internet, and all that virtual communication. That has come out strongly, and within the COVID, and also we see it applying after. So those are some of the key. We have also, I think, been publishing some articles in the newspapers as we go along on what we are doing, what is happening, and this has also received some positive response.
Good, Daisy.
Just for the rest of the regions, the areas, I think, yeah, Teshome is here, but in Ethiopia with the COVID, the chapter didn't or has not been able to continue effectively. Same with Rwanda. Maybe Anne can add on for Kenya. So that's it.
Okay. Okay, Daisy, thank you so much. Let me call on Arthur Nkosi to tell us what's happening in Southern Africa. If you unmute, Arthur.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, John. Hello, everyone. My name is Arthur Nkosi. I'm the Country Director for Core Africa in Malawi, and I'm going to be representing Rollins in Southern Africa as to what's happening. For the chapters, I'm going to be talking about Zambia as well as Malawi. So I'll start off with Zambia and just share with you as to what's been happening in the chapter here. As part of the Zambian chapter for the movement for CLD, the group has formed a COVID task force to ensure that local communities are mobilized and connected to each other and to government as well as to other actors. And this is in order to protect and care for the Zambian people during the COVID crisis, including managing the uncertainties. And so the chapter has been doing a number of things within the civil societies and organizations, institutions, at national, mid, and local levels in Zambia. The task force has focused on what needs to happen now. That is to ensure the grassroots are consistently heard and supported through emergency response. Also looking at what will be the new normal and how can we help Zambian communities adapt their mindsets to take action based on the unfolding new normal. And so looking at ways on how people are coping at this point in time. Lastly, the Zambian chapter is also looking at how can we emerge from this stronger, more resilient, and ready to face development challenges and future disasters, looking at sustainable challenges. Currently, the chapter is working on working in close coordination with the government national COVID response team, with a focus on community engagement, and also identifying and sharing chapter members' innovations that are taking place to strategize on how they can build community engagement at local levels. The next I'm going to talk about is Malawi. And in Malawi, we are currently embarking on a media project where we are going to create a panel discussion hosted by the Malawi chapter for CLD. We're going to be involving a number of different players at the national level. The Malawi National Task Force team, which has been nominated by the president. We're going to be having a member from that team to talk. We're also going to involve members from the NGO community, the NGO board, which oversees all the NGOs within Malawi. We've got over 3,000 NGOs in Malawi. We're also going to be involving private sector, religious leaders, and community lived experience members so that we can have that community engagement as part of the panel discussion. We're currently in the process of developing a draft one-pager, which we are going to present to the National COVID Task Force and look at ways in which we can set up with the different medias in the country to reach out to the community that are in the rural as well as in the urban. From that point, we want to try and share as much information as possible through the Ministry of Health and other players on how we can respond actively to the COVID-19 pandemic. But at the same time, we're also going to continue on with these discussions. This is not only going to be a one-time media approach. We're going to have a number of series where we are going to engage with the community and get feedback to see how can we involve the community in developing the best COVID-19 response. So right now, John, those are the updates that I have from Southern Region. Thank you.
What wonderful, Arthur. Thank you so much. Okay, Pascal, if you're on, it looks like you now have a microphone that works. Do you want to update us from West Africa?
Sure, John. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Pascal, the Regional Director for West Africa Hunger Projects, and I'm coordinating the MCLD activities for West Africa, 12 countries. And in terms of updates, in West Africa, we have the major projects focusing on support and strengthening the resilience of communities to fight COVID-19 and ensure the achievement of the overall sustainable development goals. Same thematic, because if we look at the involvement of the government, the private sectors, the funding agencies, and individual as well, we take the case of Benin, where we have, in 1 month span of time, mobilized more than $4 million to support the effort to fight against COVID-19. This is really enormous because without any projects, people come voluntarily to support this effort at the national level. And we build on this saying, if we consider all the sustainable development goals as urgent matter, and having the government and the funding agencies, every stakeholders involved, as we have the case for the COVID-19, moving towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals could come to reality. That is one project we are focusing on. And specifically talking about COVID-19, all the chapters in West Africa are focusing on this. And we have 4 steps. And considering what I have just said, we focus on the partnership with the government, all the civil society association, and I will mention that on the platform of our chapter now, we have more than 1,000 civil society in Benin. And we'll talk now about Nigeria, who is a very new chapter. We have about 30 now members, and we are focusing on COVID-19 with 4 steps. The first one is to make sure that at the community level, particularly in rural area, we make sure that people understand that COVID-19 is real. And the second part of the work is focusing on the measure recommended by the governments, and that is the measure we all know about how to prevent and to stop the spread out of the COVID-19. And the third aspect of the work is focusing on lifestyle, focusing on 4 specific aspects: good nutrition, by making sure that grassroots people are really using the fast-growing local vegetable. That is one aspect we are focusing on. And the second one, to make sure that people understand that adequate sleep has to do with the system, the immunization system, immune system. And the third aspect is physical exercises. And the fourth is to avoid stress. One thing I would like to stress on, how to make sure that while we are dealing with those aspects, we make the link with our CLD as a transformative community change process. And that is the core aspect we maintain in how we communicate and how we shape actions. And one thing I would like to mention is very specific to Benin. Benin's municipal election and deliberation has been published last week. And our chapter wants to come again with commune and municipalities to make sure that there is a contract between communities and the leaders, those who will be taking the lead of local governance very shortly. We are discussing again this project with the National Association of Communes and the 2 projects who are specifically dealing with local governance. And I will finish with if Dr. Rebecca is, yes, I can see she's there, to have a brief update on what is happening with the new chapter in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal.
Dr. Rebecca, are you there? Yeah, thank you,
Dr.
John.
Rebecca's there. You're muted though, Doctor. You have to click on the little microphone that's red and make it green. Oh no, that's the screen sharing. Oh, look at that. Wow. Good job, Doctor. Look at that.
So this is the Nigerian chapter. We are 30 now. And in this group, we have all categories of people, organization. We have those who are working among women and girls, and we have those who are spreading the news through media and through publication, and we have organizations who are really more concerned about the earth, that is making everywhere green planets, so they plant trees, and we have already formed ourselves into interim committee. They are all there in Nigeria, and the interim committee, we have 8 legal practitioners. We have 8 lawyers and then we have 7 trustees, and all those, the 8 interim committee together with the 8 lawyers and then the 7 trustees, we elected with them all within these groups and the organization, and they are registering and they are doing everything possible so that we will have legal entity and register this great organization in Nigeria. So we are very, very happy and we are excited, and thank you very much for allowing us to be part of this. So Nigerian chapter of the movement for the community-led development, and you can see our Nigeria
glorious,
green,
Doctor.
white, green, and all the organizations. Thank you, Brother Pascal, for giving me this chance. And we have a lot of members who are present here, and I'm very excited. And we all are happy to be part of this. And I want to chat with the Unicef that as we are there in Nigeria, plenty of us, and we have a lot of malnourished children and a lot of children out of school because of the crisis. So we will collaborate with UNICEF to work with them, because all these organizations are genuine and they are very hardworking people, and they have their people at heart in the grassroots and in the developmental work. And Pascal, he said that we are really trying to do this sustainable development goal. So we want it to happen in Nigeria, because a lot of things is only paperwork, but then the people are suffering. But we want tangible things to happen in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rebecca. Wonderful report. Be sure to email me the latest picture. I'll put it up on our website. I love that giant collection of organizations.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Yes, let me turn to Latin America, to my colleagues in Mexico. Is there anyone there who can give us a report? Diana, are you there?
Yes, I'm here,
Please.
John. Thank you. So this is Diana from the Hunger Project Mexico, the Mexican chapter. So as part of our mobilizing GFCLD actions during COVID-19, the movement launched a survey for identifying undesirable outcomes from government measures around the emergency. But unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of answers, and even though we can use this information that we have gathered until this point, it's not really representative. So there are a lot of reasons for this, and the first one might be the way that the movement built it. But there are a lot of surveys and lots of agencies and organizations are trying to gather information.
You went
right
with
now. And we know that it's understandable, but we need to avoid tiring communities. So we're also and also gathering information is a matter of responsibility to integrate communities into spreading the results. So more than develop new instruments or surveys, we want to identify similar instruments and try to coordinate efforts. So we're preparing a process with UNDP instruments for identifying actions during the recovery phase around food security and economic reactivation in rural communities. This is both for information, but also we want to start this partnership with UNDP. And besides this, we've kept translating information to local languages in partnership with some organizations of the movement, but also with the United Nations Population Fund. And also we're also starting bonding with OCHA for extending actions beyond humanitarian action, and that their activities have a community-led approach. We want to build up local communications to enforce gender-focused approach into the COVID response. And we also want to make visible and detonate questioning about the COVID response from a comprehensive perspective. And finally, we're going to have 5 webinars in the next couple of weeks. One of them is in the week of evaluation, and what we want to detonate these conversations and building knowledge and gathering data. We have some other webinars with youth and SDGs and localizing SDGs. So we will keep communicating this to you with our results. And this could be all from the Mexican chapter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let me, I'm going to go back and give an update on where we are in our numbers of people. So as you all know, most of you get emails from us every month, and you may see that we had in this month a big jump, more than a 10% growth in our overall membership. The most spectacular one, going with 20 people in the mailing list from Nigeria, from not having any mailing list at all just a few days ago. And then the research and evaluation working groups have been growing quite steadily. You'll see we're now up to 120 in the research group, and I don't know how on earth you manage 120 people, you and Natalie now. So that is our overall growth. If you have friends who aren't receiving our monthly updates, who would like to be notified of our meetings and the outcomes of the meetings, or your own country mailing list, just go to the MCLD.org website and the /subscribe, and you'll see all the links for subscribing from different countries or for the main group. Our next meeting is going to be on June 24th. As I mentioned earlier, I had never heard of this group, Accountability Council, before I read their article by Semmer, who's the fellow there on the right. Well, anyway, he's the fellow that's on the screen there above the word Wednesday. And he wrote this really excellent article, and I will send everybody a link to it before you join them next time. But Accountability Council is a group of lawyers. I think one of their colleagues is on the call today. And they have team on the West Coast and the East Coast here in Washington. But they have been really successful in getting some of the really big organizations to be more accountable and to stop doing harmful things. And so they have a very community-led approach, and we'll get to hear about some of their initiatives next meeting. As you also heard, there will be another COVID meeting that will be happening in June before our end of the month meeting, and you'll get a notice of that very soon as well. So with that, I want to thank everyone for participating today. It was another record attendance for our global meeting, and want to thank all of you for your listening. Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, hi, this is Ann Hendricks Jenkins with the Movement for Community-Led Development. Quick announcement. We have a new co-chair for our research working group. Dr. Nanette Barkey has stepped up and agreed to help co-chair the working group. So we are so excited to welcome her as a co-chair, and also want to thank Janet Edmonds from Conservation International, who co-chaired the group for several years and needed to move on recently after doing an epic job. So thank you, Janet. Welcome, Nanette. And anyone who wants to know more about the research working group, feel free to get in touch. Thank you.
Okay, so the other working group that I would like to heavily promote here is the communications working group. If you are using social media, Twitter or Facebook, to promote the ideas of community-led development, we'd like you to join the communications working group so that we can say in communications we're really trying to get our messages, particularly, for example, last week was the World Health Assembly. We really bombed them with tweets left and right about the importance of community engagement and community health. We'll be doing the same with other important meetings that are coming up. Whenever policymakers gather and look at their Twitter, we want them to see us. So thank you all, and I will send out the recording later today. I'll send out the notes later today, and we'll see you next month. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Andrea, good to see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sister, please don't have me, I think the material thing.
Bye-bye.